one of the basic principles for me is to remember that there's no such thing as not having values. So the person I'm talking to will have values. And my question is, what are those values? And I really feel like I want to find out what they are. I'm very curious about that. And in that conversation then, I think there are so many opportunities to also talk about my own values and kind of then have sort of like a little bit of a synopsis, like looking at these values together and say, I wonder, how did you come up with those values? How did I come up with my values? But what's in there for me, and this is really one of the most important pieces of mentoring, is really this respecting of the other. Even if my mentee, which he doesn't, but told me that he smoked pot every day. Now, I have never smoked pot in my life, and not even inhale. Not inhale, I mean.
Really not here.
I have not. But so, is that a value? I mean, I guess at this point it's a value, but I also really have to say that probably was like a matter of circumstances for me. But so if that person told me, I think my first question would be, so what's that like? Tell me about it.
You know, if there's an action that's being exhibited that I disagree with based on my values, based on the values, like you said, they have values, they may not recognize it. So when I was younger, maybe I did have values, I just didn't recognize it. But if I see a behavior that's coming that's not really something that's advisable that they should be doing, then instead of me just saying you shouldn't do that, you should do this, the first thing that I believe is that I find out why they're doing it. So you can never just change someone. You have to first you have to gain acceptance from them, which means I listen to them, understand where they're coming from. You know, you hit that boy in the face, why'd you do that? Because, you know, there may be a good reason to hit him in the face, just don't do it. But first you understand without judging. Through that understanding comes acceptance, and then through that acceptance comes influence, and through the influence comes change. But if I don't take the first 3 steps, then I'm never going to be able to reach that change.
So you might find yourself thinking, but maybe even saying, you know, I really get that you hit him in the face.
Yeah.
You might actually say that,
hey.
because we both understand rage. We both understand indignation, you know. And then comes the next step, in one way or another, to say, I wonder what other choices you have.
And that's the key, is that while I can understand why you hit him in the face, in your mind, that may have been a good reason. And I always tell the young men, ask yourself the 2-word question, then what? I feel like that person deserved for me to do this, but then what? Because just because you felt justified doesn't mean that you don't have to face the consequences for what you've done. So when I tell a young man that, okay, you feel, okay, you're standing strong in that, but understand this. If you go to jail for that, I don't visit young men in jail, so that's part of your consequences, that you're going to do the time by yourself. So if you feel that convicted on it, then understand the consequences come with it. So I never just say, I understand, then leave it at that, because they may leave there thinking that what they're doing is okay.
So I would say, I will definitely come visit you in jail. But I'd rather not have to visit you there. I'd rather continue to visit with you here.
I tell them how to stay out of prison ministry. That's somebody else's ministry. My ministry is before you go to prison. So you go to jail, you're on your own.
So there is a limit. About you're on your own. That means at that point, I'm not there for you.
And it's not so much not being there for you, it's a matter of you need to be there for yourself. And if I'm telling you up front, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to keep you from having this outcome. And if you are dead set to do the things that's going to cause that outcome, then you knew that, then I'm not giving up on you, you giving up on me, you giving up on yourself. And what's happening is that once they deal with their situation and come out, I'm still there for them. I'm not leaving. They left. So I'm not saying that it's wrong to go visit your mentee if they get in trouble and go to jail. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that's not me. I have too many that I'm trying to keep from going to jail. If I tell you don't go over there and get involved in that fight because you're going to go to jail, and you do it anyway.
So now,
Okay.
go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, so I think what I'm hearing you talk about, you said, then you have let me down. So what plays a role in this, and I think this is such a crucial thing for us mentors to think about, is how do we deal with our disappointment when the mentee, that person that we've given so much to, doesn't turn out the way that we want them to turn out. And so one of my favorite scenes from The Lion King, you all remember, I'm not going to tell the whole thing, is when the dead Mufasa comes back to Simba, and he says,
Mufasa died? I didn't know he died.
says, Simba, I'm disappointed in you. Right? And instead of saying, I'm so glad you're alive, I'm so glad you're there. So there's a lot more to say about that, but I guess I'm thinking we have to be really careful with disappointment. And in a way, as the mentors, I think that is partly what our task is, that sense of maturity that we can hold our disappointment at bay.
So we're seeing a little bit how we bring to mentoring our own personality experiences and values. And clearly on this one, you would be there in the prison and you would be waiting for your young man to come out.
I'll be there when he come out.
Okay. So I think part of the lesson for us is we can't be someone that we're not. So we have to bring ourselves into the relationship, but we can also learn how to do that well. One of the things we really wanted to talk about, because many of our mentor pairs are with people who identify as white and students who identify as black. So race does become a part of mentoring for many pairs. So we said we would have a little bit of dialogue between you and how you think that race impacts your experience as a mentor. And maybe learn from one another on that too.
It might be a minute now. You might want to set your mic down for me. When it comes to race and mentoring, I've often been asked a question: should it make a difference if there's a Caucasian mentor and an African American mentee? Should it make a difference? No. But does it? Yes. And the reason why is because when you're trying to connect with a young person, one of those things is you can connect because you've been where they were. And if you've never been a young boy from the hood growing up as a black man in America, you can tell a young black boy how it is growing up as a black man in America. And I gave the example the other day. We have a daughter, and my little girl has questions. I can't answer one question that she has about how it is to be a little girl, because I've never been one. Caitlin might be able to answer that, but I don't know. But what I'm saying is, she needs that woman there that she can connect with. My sons need a man there that they can connect with. So when it comes to some things that are unique to the African American mentee, then it's important to be able to have that resource available. You may not be able to speak to it. I have the advantage of, have the example. My brother right here, my chief Brian, he has two young African American girls that he adopted. And when it came to doing their hair, he came and said, "Hey, do you think that my wife can call your wife to ask about how to do a young black girl's hair?" That's smart. That's, so he couldn't connect from the standpoint of knowing the answer right there, but he used the resources that were available.
Yeah. So, first of all, I guess I have to say, in a way, there's not having grown up in this country makes me possibly more naive about what all is at stake when it comes to this problem, this question. I principally, of course, I absolutely understand and respect that different cultural experiences mean that we mature differently and that we have different things to say about ourselves, about our families, goals in life, and all that stuff. I also really think that there's something that we're not able to really understand yet, and that is, it is quite possible for a black person to understand a white person, and vice versa. And that, if it were that divided, then, I would not trust any of you, because I grew up in Germany. I would be very, you don't get me, really. But I think that there is a level on which we really do get each other. where we can ask questions on that level, which then will help us understand more about the particulars of the race and culture that you come from. That is really my hope for these pairings and these opportunities, that we can have the curiosity and then the courage to ask questions based on that curiosity.
So it sounds like you would look for what we have in common as human beings, and you would bring a particular experience that Martin is not going to have.
And that's, you know, the commonality in your humanity, that goes across the board. It doesn't matter who you're dealing with. But when you have the uniqueness of a difference in race, I think to ignore that will be doing a disservice to the young person that you're working with. Because I have some young white men that I mentor when I do my group mentoring. I have our administrative assistant. Her son is one of the boys I work with one-on-one. And the thing is, when I do deal with them, if it's something that's unique to young African American men, there's an inherent trust because I'm like them. Mr. Edwards, you've been through this. You grew up. You know what it's like. But when I'm dealing with a young Caucasian male, there are certain things that I can give advice, because good advice is good advice no matter what. But if he says, can you tell me, why am I dealing with this growing up in St. Joe? Dude, I can't help you, you know, but I got a guy, you know, because I didn't grow up in small town America.
But how do you do it, Phil, when you have a white mentee? How do you come to a place where you really feel, yeah, he trusts me? What do you do? In spite of the fact that you don't know anything about life in St. Joe's. What do you do?
Well, when the only time that becomes relevant is when there's a question that's unique to growing up in St. Joe. Outside of that, the young men, a lot of times, they will gravitate towards me. And sometimes I can't even take credit. This is not me. They just see a bunch of young men that's coming along. Hey, I want to go with the group. Look like they're having fun. So it's not necessarily trusting me. So they come because, you know, when we're playing sports and doing things, having fun, they come for that. But then when we get to know each other on a human level, and I just want to say this real quick, when I have my groups of mentees, I have each of them stand up at one point, you know, okay, it's your week. Young man, tell us 3 things about yourself that you don't mind the group knowing that we don't necessarily want to know public. And the reason why is because I want my young men to know that we're not just hanging out. I want you guys to build friendships with one another. So it's more about them building friendships with each other as they go through life.
So the question that comes to me is, who initiates the topic? If you're in a mixed race relationship, how does that happen? Have you had conversations with your mentee?
So, I mean, this is a good example because, so we had one preparatory meeting to have this panel. And right after that meeting, I went to see Jesse. And so I said, you know, I just came from this meeting and here's what we talked about. And this issue came up, you know. So what do you think about it? And now, we've had a relationship for like 5 or 6 years now. And so, you know, I would say there is a lot of trust and it's possible to bring it up in that way. But we had a pretty good conversation about this. This was open. And, you know, to the question of, so how do you identify and, you know, influences there. And so it was a really open and I think mutually trusting
So you're saying either, if the trust is there, either party can talk about it. What do you think, Phil?
As far as broaching the topic, it's not necessary. It's not necessary to force it. If the young man has a question, then you answer their question. If there are things happening in society, then you may, after the Ferguson deal happened, they were doing a protest at the U of I, and I took a couple of my mentees there to see, okay, we're going to go and actually see a protest. You're not getting involved, but you know, so that opened the door. Now it just so happened that I had African American mentees at that time. But had there been a Caucasian mentee with me at the same time, I would have taken him too. And that might have spurred that conversation. It wasn't necessary. I mean, when I'm talking with you know, the young men that were like me when I was that age, it's easy. You know, it's not something that has to be brought up, it just is. So my advice to any mentor that's dealing with a mentee that's different than you, when the differences are brought up, address it head on, but you don't have to necessarily force yourself to bring it up.
You mentioned Ferguson and, you know, Baltimore and all the other places, and Champaign, Urbana, right? Where, you know, we see, so like, are maybe more and more aware of the violence and the craziness and the divides. How do you talk about that with your mentees, if you do? Does it come up?
When I talk to my mentees, there was a very interesting question I had of them. I asked, I said, if a police officer says come here, and you know you didn't do anything wrong, do you have to do what they say? And I was shocked that most of my young men said no, because I didn't do anything wrong. And with that perception being there, then you understand, okay, well, if you don't do what they say, then it escalates. So I explained to them, no, as long as the police aren't telling you to do something that's illegal or unsafe, you have to do what they say. Now, why is that relevant to young black men? Well, we all see the news. And I tell the young men, if a police officer does something wrong to you and you don't agree with it, do what they say and let us fight it in the courtroom while you're in class instead of something happening and we're at a funeral service for you. Now, I haven't had to have that conversation with my Caucasian mentees. They're allowed to weigh in, they usually don't, but it hasn't been necessary because in the news, you're not hearing about young white boys being shot every day. You're hearing about young black boys being shot. So therefore, the conversation has to be relevant to the topic, and it's not forced, it just comes.
Yeah, there's so much fear, right, that goes into, what I'm sensing, goes into raising a black young man. So much fear that something bad will happen to him, just because he's black.
I wouldn't say fear. I would say a heightened sense of awareness, concern. I can't let fear be my reason for how I raise my boys, because then I would deprive them of things. But I would definitely say a heightened sense of awareness. You don't have the luxury. I have my son that goes to SIU. You know, he had an encounter with a police officer where it was him and two young white men, and the police came to him and asked questions. He thought so little about it till he didn't even mention it to us till one day, far later, was like, hey, I didn't even know you had that encounter. And the reason I say that is because that's one of the elements that should be addressed for young black men growing up, is that if not from their mentee, they need to get it from someone. And if you're not comfortable enough to bring that up, find someone who you can.
I really, really like that you said it's not fear, because that would make me deprive them of things. I mean, that to me seems to be such a crucial thing, that sometimes we let fear be our advisor when we relate to our children and mentees. And fear makes us clamp down, makes us be harsh, makes us be unkind, when really we're depriving them. So we have to figure out how to hold our own, if it is fear. Maybe there is some kind of fear, worry, concern, whatever you want to call it, it's there, but how do we translate that into how we practice mentoring?
I think there's a difference between having a sense of fear and having a spirit of fear. I'll give an example. A sense of fear. I'm scared of dogs. All right? So if a dog is coming, I have a sense of fear. However, just because I'm scared of dogs doesn't mean I'm going to let it keep me from walking down the street because a dog might come by. So I think that's the difference between having a sense of fear and having a spirit of fear. So when it comes to, dealing with my question to you, and I don't know if you can answer that, but I'd like to ask some of the mentees, do we have very many mentor-mentee combinations where the mentor is African American and the mentee is Caucasian, and, how do you think that dynamic works? Or
We don't have that, I don't think. So we're going to wrap it up here, but before we do, I want each of you, because we've hung out enough together, and you can see some differences, but I'd like each of you to just, as your closing comment, Martin, say what you see in Phil that you really respect and value, and likewise, Phil, for Martin.
What I really see, Phil, is how, first of all, you're your concern for these males, especially that, you know, and how they need an authority. And there's always this distinction between being authoritarian, which is being a dictator, and being authoritative, which is being, you know, someone to look up to. And I can sense that you are that second person, that you are an authority and they look up to you, and that authority literally means a self. You have that self. And it comes through your biography. It comes through everything that you've experienced. And even without saying a single word, I think your mentees and I and everyone else, I think, can sense that. And that is just such a wonderful thing that you're bringing to this, that it's invaluable. It really is.
What I really like about you is the fact that you have shown me that there's more than one way to get to St. Louis. I might like to take 57, but you said, hey, you could go and take 55. The freedom that you express, the freedom that you allow your mentee to make their own decisions, make their choices, and live with the consequences. I tend to clamp down a little bit more when I see them headed a certain direction. I'm like, hey, this is going to go like this, so you might want to go back this way. Therefore, they haven't learned that hard lesson of hitting their head against the wall and knowing not to do that again. You allow them to do that. Not saying I'm an advocate of concussions, but I do say that there's value in letting that child learn the hard way. And you do that by not forcing them to go a different direction. And another thing I like about what you bring to the table is that my mentees that do end up going to jail, they'll have someone to go visit.
Express our appreciation for that as well.
I trust that this raised some questions for you, some wonderings. We did not set out to give you a lot of answers, but to give you the permission to ask questions and wonder and think about your own relationship. So I hope that's what was accomplished today. And I hope that you, if you're interested, will talk with Phil, with Martin, with Jim, with the other people at your table, with other people that you mentor with at your school. Talk about this with some of the issues, some of the things we've talked about. And there was one thing that Phil was going to mention that Jim was going to remind you of, that everyone forgot.
There is a documentary called Racial Taboo, which really digs deep into the topic of race in America. And there's going to be a showing of it at Vineyard Church on the 28th, which is a week from Thursday. And what they'll do, we'll look at the documentary, which takes about 50 minutes, and then we will break into small groups to discuss it even further. And it gives you the opportunity to really ask the hard questions. This was light up here, this was light. But it really, you know, if you're really interested in, you know, reaching racial harmony, it really gives you the opportunity to start that conversation and move towards that. So Racial Taboo, Vineyard Church, 6 o'clock, January 28th on a Thursday. And is that all information?
We can actually send out an email, Lauren and I both will, that will have Martin and Philip's contact information. If you'd like to email them, they would be happy to respond. We will also pass out, send out the information about that, the showing of that documentary if you'd like to attend. Before we close, Dr. Owen, Superintendent of Urbana Schools, wants to give a final word of encouragement. Dr. Owen and his twin brother.
Phil found my name tag and he's been wearing it all afternoon just to confuse me. I'm going to give Barbara a little bit of a hard time because for the last 3 years she's asked me to kind of close out. And I feel like it's a little bit of a benediction and I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that. And I always feel like I can't follow whatever's up here. And each year it's even better than before. I was sitting here watching this stage of 3 people having an incredibly intense conversation about meaningful topics, and I just had to reflect on the last few times I've turned on the TV and seen a stage with people with microphones. And I'm sorry, really don't want to go political here, but seriously, we need to give these three gentlemen a round of applause. And I just have to say, I don't know what you did in advance, Jim, but you kind of had it easy up here. You know? Phil and Martin, you guys did an amazing job, and all of you did what you do really well, which was listen. And that's one of the things that's amazing about mentoring for me, is listening. One of the things that I thank my mentee for is the time that he gives me that allows me to slow down and just listen. And that's one of the most important things in my week, is spending an hour listening to someone else, not judging, and just giving him an opportunity to share what he needs to share. This has given me a lot to think about, and I leave the same challenge with you all the time. Barbara already gave you a little bit of a preview. I'm gonna say this as well. You know, tomorrow is Thank a Mentor Day. We're all thanking you today. Tomorrow you'll have something special in your email. Take some time, take a few minutes. Reflect on what you get. Reflect on that thank you. And then think about how you can tell that story to someone else. How you can tell the story of how important mentoring is to you, to someone who isn't a mentor. One of the things that makes me so proud to be a part of this community is that we've created a culture where mentoring matters, where mentoring has an impact, and where mentoring is something that we do. I was meeting with Representative Davis. He was visiting Dr. Williams' school just before I came over here. And actually, my mentee saw me in the hall and said, "Hey, that's my mentor." I got to have a conversation with Representative Davis about mentoring this community. And he had heard about the CU one-to-one mentoring program, which I would hope he would. He's pretty in tune with what's going on in his district. But having that little brief conversation drove home to me how important what we do in Urbana-Champaign is for our young people to help them succeed. And one more time, we need to thank Barbara and Lauren and all of the building coordinators, because they do such an amazing job making our work easy. So can we give them a round? This is National Mentoring Month. Thank you for all you do, all of your time and all of your effort to make a difference in someone's life. Thank you.